welcome Erick Erickson.
As much of a DC insider as I am, I don't think I've been here in 5 years. This place is a construction zone. It's weird. I went for a walk on the mall the other night, was not accosted by a single homeless person, and couldn't see anything because all the construction broke, which is fine. Thank you for having me. Akash just told me to come. I was like, nobody in DC wants to hear from me. I get the hate mail all the time, I know. And he's like, no, there are some. So I want to begin with a story probably you have heard, and I never write speeches, and for this I thought I should at least jot down notes of what I really want to cover, so I have it in writing when someone yells at me for the things I'm about to say. There is a man, you know the story probably, he's searching for his keys under a street lamp, and a neighbor comes to try to help him. And after some time, they can't find the keys under the street lamp, and the neighbor says, where do you think you lost the keys? They're not here. And the man says, well, over there, in the grass. The neighbor says, why aren't we looking over there? And the man answers, because the light's over here. We're supposed to laugh at the fool for looking for keys he knows aren't there because he's looking at the lights, but there's also something that I think his neighbor and a lot of people who have been in the conservative movement have forgotten, that you can't actually see anything in the dark, and the sensible place to start is where the light actually is. And I want to actually talk to you about that light because I think we've forgotten that those of us who are still holding true to what we've always believed, we're standing in it. And like a fish doesn't know he's in water, do we actually even know we're in the light anymore? When you listen to the noise of our public life, you listen to how serious people talk about the family these days as if it's a social construct and it needs to be redesigned. Listen to how they talk about the markets as if it's a machine to be managed by our social betters, even on the right. Listen to how they talk about neighborhoods and the church and the small associations that built the country, the ones that Tocqueville talked about, as if they were quaint at best and obstacles at worst. We need national policies now, down to the local level, even among conservatives, supposedly. We need these national policies. Listen to how they talk about individuals these days, created in the image of God with a conscience and a will, and now it's a demographic data point, a category, or maybe a perpetual grievance to be inflamed at all times through the bidding of a greater power in Washington, D.C. that gives a lot of lip service to the heartland, but even among those who in many cases call themselves principled conservatives these days, they think the heartland needs to be managed from here. And is any of it working? Children are not happier, families aren't safer, streets aren't safer, neighbors aren't freer, the markets aren't better off by having command and control in Washington, D.C. We're not at peace with each other, we're more and more at war with each other, our neighbors don't know our neighbors. Jeremiah wrote to the Israelites in exile in Babylon and said, seek the welfare of the community in which you live, because there you'll find your welfare. And even among people who claim to be part of our movement, they think our welfare in Macon, Georgia is determined by bureaucrats and technocrats in Washington, D.C., but it's their side who controls them, so the outcomes will be virtuous. That temptation is to believe because the other side has failed so spectacularly, what's needed now is something equally dramatic for us on our side. Something bolder, something newer, something that matches the moment in volume and fury. Don't you know what time it is? You've all heard that question asked. Well, they say it's time for something new, a better system, a newer movement, a newer strongman, and some sort of revolution for our side of the aisle. And there are some who have become like Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, wearing his victim's skin, and they've got a skin suit of conservatism, draped in the language and the symbols and traditions, while screaming, what is conservatism conserved? Precious, precious, what is conservatism conserved? I mean, you know the people I'm talking about. They're too chicken to give up the mantle of conservatism for whatever it is they are now. They want to call themselves conservative without actually being conservative. And when they ask what is conservatism conserved, it's not actually an indictment of conservatism. It's a confession that they never intended to conserve anything. They wanted to co-opt the movement for their own ends. They want the central planners. They want the tariffs. They want the strongmen. They want the grand designs that conservatism itself is supposed to resist. And by the way, please spare me your concerns about the church in America and the war on faith and the decline in values and morality if you've never actually darkened the door of a church. I'm amazed at the people who put themselves into positions of power within the conservative movement who claim to care greatly about these things and have no relationship to a local church, let alone God Almighty himself. So I want to say to you today that none of that's conservatism. It never has been conservatism. And if we give into it, we're not going to save anything we love. We're going to lose it. What has conservatism conserved? I know you had a panel on it, but it's preserved the family and conserved the family and the church and the Constitution and the habit of self-government and the dignity of the individual and the sanctity of life and the Second Amendment and the rule of law, all the things these people who we ask what conservatism has conserved, and don't you know what time it is, kind of want to scrap or rebuild in their own image. When actually they're doing just fine without people in Washington, including those on the right, telling them what to do. We've conserved them imperfectly. We've conserved them against great pressure, and the proof we've conserved them is that we're all able to stand here in freedom and ask these questions, and these jackasses can ask what we've conserved and what time it is when they don't even have a watch on. The history of the last 100 years is largely the history of what happens when intelligent people convince themselves that the old arguments are not enough, that something bolder is required, that the inheritance handed down to them is too small for the moment that they and we face, the planned economies, the engineered societies, the grand designs imposed from above by people certain they know better than the generations that came before, and every one of them began with the same intoxicating thought that they can do better than what was, and every one of them ended in the suffering their architects couldn't have imagined. We're conservatives because we've learned the lessons that we conservatives understand human beings are limited. In the language of Christianity, we're sinful, we're fallen, knowledge is dispersed, the institutions around us that have been built over time, the family, the church, the markets, the rule of law, and the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence we inherited, encode more wisdom than any one of us, any counsel of us can articulate. We're conservatives because we know the burden of proof always rests on the one who would tear something down, even as they demand the burden of proof rest on those who would preserve what is standing. We're conservatives because we understand what G.K. Chesterton called the democracy of the dead, those who came before us through trial and error and very often failure, finally settled upon what works, often after much hardship. We shouldn't so arrogantly or cavalierly cast it all aside. We shouldn't believe that we can do better just because we're in the here and now and have the iPhone our forefathers did not have. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for what they were building. Most of these people just pledged their time behind a keyboard. The only thing left standing between civilization and the next bright idea that promises to remake the world is a conservative movement grounded in the timeless principles to understand we don't actually know better than those who came before us. And so I would encourage you as we have these debates on what it means to be a conservative, a freedom conservative, a conservative in any other name, is just to keep the candle lit. You don't have to curse the darkness, as some of our friends have gone astray and decided they need to rebuild the brand. A man holding a candle doesn't have to curse the darkness. He just has to stand there so people can see. And that's what our work in the conservative movement, I personally think, is. We don't have to argue with those masquerading as conservatives today. We're here to keep the candle lit and know that their projects and ideas are doomed to fail. We don't have to invent anything. And I think that's what a lot of people who've gotten restless in the conservative movement think, that we have to invent stuff. We don't have to invent anything. The dignity of the individual is older than all of us. The family is older than all of us. The platoons of civil society, from the congregation to the Rotary Club to the Little League to the volunteer fire department to even private property rights, are all older than us. And the free exchange between willing buyers and willing sellers, where the individuals know best what to do for themselves and their families, it's older than us. The rule of law is older than us. We didn't create them, but we can tend them and steward them. We can receive them and pass them down to our children. It's the whole job, is to receive and to tend and to pass on. You know, in the Garden of Eden, God told Adam and Eve, you're going to have a job. When we all get to heaven, we won't be floating on clouds. We'll be put to work. We're required to be good stewards of the garden. We're required to be good stewards of conservatism. And that does include pruning of people and institutions and bad ideas gone astray, of the prevailing narcissism of the new and the shiny, and ever increasingly the anti-Semitic. And it's not glamorous work, and it doesn't make headlines, and it's not going to get us invited to fancy parties or quoted in these magazines that they love and the online journals. And it could cost us friendships and job opportunities and social acquaintances. It can cost us economically. We talk about ideas, but we ignore the realities and the strains and the loss from the stewardship of conservatism in an age of bored people who want to be entertained by the new and the shiny. I've felt that loss myself among friends and job opportunities. But we commit ourselves to building a society that actually flourishes, not a society that the intellectuals on either side of the left or right design on paper, the society that individual people build over centuries. And that's not gone. I haven't been here in 5 years. I live in Macon, Georgia. I tell people all the time, you got to seek the welfare of the community in which you live. And if you live in Washington, seek its community welfare. If you live in Macon, Georgia, seek its. We shouldn't be driven, hag-ridden to existential terrors by what happens in Washington if we don't live there. And our task, I think, is just to remind ordinary people that there's more than Washington, there's more than power, and we should reject the idea that somehow within the conservative movement we now need technocrats within the movement to pull the levers and strings of power to design an economy that I think people are left to their own devices are better able to design for themselves. The noise gets louder than the signal often up here, I think, and the chattering classes online where too many people in the conservative movement are perpetually on Twitter and not outside actually getting to know their neighbor. All you have to do is remember the man under the street lamp. Everybody says he's a fool looking for where it's easy instead of where it's hard. But the light's not the limitation. The light's the gift. And for us conservatives, we can be the light. And that's where the keys to the future actually are. So stand in it when it's fashionable, when it's hard. Stand in it when you're praised. Stand in it when you're mocked. Stand in it with your friends. Stand in it when your friends refuse to stand in it too. Stand in it when you don't know where your friends are these days because they seem to have changed their minds and they think you're crazy and you know they've gone nuts. The darkness is real. I've experienced it in my life. I've experienced friendships with people that have gone away because for some reason I'm still standing where I believed all these years, and now they're on to the new and shiny and the repackaged conservatism that no conservative would ever acknowledge as conservatism. But all you have to do is stand up, keep the candle lit. Sometimes civilization moves on. Sometimes people move on. But if we conserve actual conservatism, conserve freedom, conserve the idea of federalism and local government and the Declaration and the idea that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the pursuit of happiness means for them to pursue their happiness, not for a group of technocrats who call themselves right-wing to guide them for it, not to have an industrial policy that is devoid of actually industry and deprives people of their own economies to be able to make a living for themselves. We'll do just fine. We can still be the light. We know that our ideas are still right. And at the end of the day, however discouraging it can sometimes be to see our friends suddenly abandon their faculties and embrace the new and shiny because they think there's some time on a clock on a watch they're not wearing, and it's a time to do something new, just stand pat. The world comes back. The ideas are timeless. Progressives have no sense of history because they always move on from it, and they always keep circling back to the bad ideas of the past. And all we need to do is make sure that our friends on our side who've gone a little wobbly don't try to embrace the ideas on the ash heap of history. Just hold firm to what we know works, because at the end of the day, the markets do work, and families work, and individuals work, and Washington rarely ever does. Thank you very much.